Hi, I'm Sharon Chinn, and today we're going to paint this little love bug on a phone charger stand. We're starting with a sealed panel that's birch plywood, and I've put some drops of sapphire blue and titanium white on the board, and now I'm rolling it out with a brayer. Kind of have to experiment with how much paint to put on this. I've put a little bit too much, so it's really kind of messy and running off the edges. I should have used smaller drops. But we're just going to roll this around until we get it spread out and a little bit of variegation in color. And then we'll stop and wipe the edges down so it's not quite so messy. Now at this stage I'm going to take a small mop brush and just pounce on the surface a little bit and soften these two colors together. I wanted this to look sort of like a cloudy blue sky. So if you get too much paint in your brush, just wipe it off and continue pouncing. And I'd like a little bit more, I think, white in the background. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of the titanium white on my brush and just tap it in this area that's more blue. This is just a kind of a trial and error, so you're going to get a different effect each time just based on the amount of the two colors that you're using and how you roll it. So I'd still like some more white, so I'm going to go back and add some little dots of white here and there and roll the surface one more time. It's dry now, so I'm putting this white paint on a dry board. So as I roll it, the white isn't rolling out quite so smoothly, so since we're not rolling into wet paint, so I'm going to dribble a little bit of water. Just put some drops on and continue rolling, and that water makes the white move a little bit more. So just keep rolling that out, and I think this is more the effect I want. I want it more white in this background, so I should have started initially with more white and less blue. So I'm just continuing to roll that white out so it goes out over all the blue, but we still see the blue through it. And then I'm going to pick my mop brush up again and again tap it and just soften this down a little. Now this really has a much more cloudy blue look. The next step, we're going to stencil a pattern on the background, and I'm using an Andy Skinner stencil card called Tornado. And I'm going to use a Royal Sable brush to do my stenciling. And I'm positioning the stencil so that the center is about where I think the little bug's head's going to be. So those little swirls are going to kind of work out around the head of the bug. And I'm just starting with some of the sapphire blue on my brush, and I'm going to just smear that a little around. I'm not trying to cover every little groove in the stencil. I just want some of these little swirl patterns to add a little bit of activity to the background over top of these clouds. So I'm going to work some blue, and now I'm going to pick up a little bit of the white to create a lighter blue. I've not cleaned my brush, I'm just working them together, and I'm going to continue on brushing on this stencil. This will soften the colors down a little bit more. And you can just, again, do as much or as little as you want. If you don't have the Tornado stencil, you can find some other stencil that you like for your background. It doesn't have to be this one. Or you don't have to stencil at all. You could just leave the background with the clouds. So there's our finished background. Next, we're going to transfer our design And I've traced the pattern onto some tracing paper, and I'm kind of positioning it so that the bug is centered on my panel, and I'm sliding some gray graphite under it. Make sure the right side is down so that you don't waste your time transferring to the back of your tracing. So I'm just going to do these main pattern outlines. I don't want all the little details, so I'm not going to transfer eyes or the lettering on the heart, things like that right now. And I'm using just a small stylus to go around these lines. So as you get done, you can, hold it in place, but pull it back and see if you've got all your lines traced over. And if you don't, go back and fill in any that you've missed before you remove the whole tracing. Now we're going on to base coating. And I'm just using the white and a small flatter angle brush to paint in the bug's face, and we're going to do his stomach in white. Okay, now we're moving on to the red parts of the bug, and the red is very transparent. So on our first base coats, we're going to use a pink, which we're going to take our cinnamon drop red and mix it with some titanium white. And I'm just brush mixing. I don't care if this is an exact mix each time. I just want a nice solid pink. And I'm just going to go in and fill in the wings, and we'll do the heart and around the edges of the head and body. Any place where we're going to have the ladybug be red. So you just want to work that in and just keep filling in all this with a nice medium value pink. So it's probably about half red and half white. But the white gives the red more opacity. So we're going to cover this background in one coat. So just continue on and base in your pink areas. And you can see here around the head, I'm using an angle brush, but I'm working, because these are coming down to a little just sliver of color, I'm working kind of up on the chisel edge, so I can pull around and lift that brush and keep my little edges very narrow. Okay, continue on and just fill in your heart with the same pink mix. And like I said, if your pink varies just a little bit, it's no big deal. We're going to do a lot of floats of the red over this color. And it just adds a little to the variation. Next, I'm using like a number 4 round brush, and I'm going to paint in the bug's legs with black. and his feet. Now, if you feel like your paint's moving a little too stiffly, you know, if it's a little too thick, you can always add just a little touch of water. So when you see me taking my brush off to the right side of the screen, my water basin's over there, and I'm just picking up a little bit of water in my brush. Just brush mixing that into the black to make it a little more inky. At this point, we're not going to paint the arms. I'm going to wait till we get finished doing the shading and stuff on the heart, so we're not working around the little black hands and things. So now we're going on to do some shading and highlighting. And to shade the white, we're going to just brush mix a little kind of soft gray value. And I'm just side loading my brush and just picking up a little bits of white and black and blending them together in that little track on my wax palette. So we just want just a soft gray, and we're going to float that around the edges of the white. So up here around the head, and you can see I work in little short choppy strokes and then work back over to the whole area to kind of soften them together. I very seldom clean my brush as I'm side loading. So I'm just going to keep working back, reload my brush in that little track of paint. And we're going to work here underneath the heart. And whenever I feel like the paint's dragging a little too much, I'll go over and I'll just add a touch of water to my brush by holding it against the side, flat against the side of my water basin, and just slide it down so the tip touches in the water. And then slide it back up. And that seems to be just the right amount of water for side loading color or floating color. I usually like my floats a little bit wetter, so that the paint is movable and, you know, blends out a little easier. So I'm going to add a little more water again, go back into my track of paint, and I can just pick up where I left off. I'm going to walk that paint out a little bit, so I'm, you know, just pulling away from where I first laid the brush down, and then just making that float a little wider. So now we're going here along the top edge of the heart. And that should be all for the moment that we're going to do on the white. I always do my floats in 2 or 3 layers. So we're switching to the cinnamon drop red, and we're going to start floating the pink color to make this ladybug more red. And so I'm going to be jumping here and there around because I don't like to float over top or against these inside corners. So I'm going to do the bottom edge of this wing, soften that out. Do the edge of the body here. And then we're going to switch over to the other side and work on the bottom of the opposite wing while the other one's drying. And again, this will be just the first layer. I'll repeat these floats on the bug about at least 2 to 3 times. The red's pretty transparent, so you'll still see the pink glow through the center, and that'll add your highlights. Pick up a little more water and a little more paint. And again, if you keep working in that same track, you won't have to clean and reload your brush very often. You'll just keep adding a little bit of paint to it or water as you need it. So now we're going back across and doing the top edge of this wing. And it should be dry enough that we're not disturbing the float on the bottom edge. Now as you're working around like this head, we don't want that pink to come down on the white, so you'll, it's probably hard to tell, but I'm really working more on the tip of my brush, the long toe, and the heel of my brush is kind of up off the surface. You could switch to a smaller brush, but it's easier and faster just to keep working with the same one. I'm using, I think this is a 3/8 inch angular. And I do like the Royal Fusion brushes. They're a little bit, they have a little more spring to them than some of the golden Taklons. So I feel like I get a little bit more pressure to work my layers of paint. Now we're going to work around the heart. And as you work around the heart, you can turn your board, and you want to kind of keep that brush perpendicular to the edge. So you'll need to adjust your angle as you work around. That will keep your float a little wider and not let it get to be some little narrow stripe. So you'll see I'll turn my board, and again I'm working perpendicular to that edge. And as we add our additional layers, we'll start working that color out towards the center of the heart a little more. So we'll let that side of the heart dry before we try to float the other side. And we'll go back and start adding a second float on the wings that are dry now. So just work back over a second layer over the areas you've done that have dried. Okay, we're going to finish off the other side of the heart now. And you can still see, even on the wings where we've added at least 3 coats of that red over it, you can still see the pink glow through that gives a nice little highlight in the center. Because our base coat of the white and red, you know, making that pink color, when we put this red over it, it all coordinates because you're using the same colors over top of each other. And I just think it gives really a pretty glow to this piece. Just always keep flipping your board around, you know, so that you're working at a comfortable angle. Don't try to force your brush or your arm into uncomfortable positions. Get a little hair or something in my paint. And as you float, you'll find that, you know, when the first layer you put on might look a little splotchy, but each layer you add over top will start smoothing things out. I got a little too much water in my brush this time, so I'm trying to dry it out on a paper towel. I decided there was a little piece of the body here in between the arm and the stomach or chest that I wanted to add a little bit of red to. So I'm going to get that in here before we get to the point where we're painting arms in. And I'm going to come back and just float a little bit of a shadow against the arm on each side on the wing. Going to add a second float over top of our heart. I'm going to try to pull that red in towards the center a little bit more on this layer. So I start at the edge and then I lay some color down in a little closer to the center and then smooth it together. While that one's drying, I'm going to go back and again put another layer over top of the head. And just here and there on the body where I feel like we need a little more color. And I'm going to stop now and go back and paint in our arms. So I'm using the number 4 round in black and just curving them around the outside of this heart. I'm not going to paint the hands yet. We'll do them later. We don't want to have to keep working around those hands as we do some of our final shading. I'm just real carefully trying to do the edges so they're smooth. Add a little water if you need to, if your paint gets too thick. Just that little touch of water will make it go on a little inkier and smoother. Okay, our next step is going to be to increase the highlights a little bit by adding some dry brushed white. And again, I'm using a Royal Sable brush, and I've stepped down to maybe a number 16, and I've loaded some white on my brush, and you want to swirl that around on your wax palette to get that brush really the paint worked into it, and then brush the excess off on, I'm using just a piece of brown cardboard, or you can use a paper towel, before I apply it to my surface so I don't have any globs of paint. And then I'm just working in a circular motion on my surface. When you want your paint, just a little bit probably stiffer, so you don't want real wet paint. And I really like it when it's at a point where when I'm scrubbing it on my surface, it almost makes a powder, like a talcum powder. And I have to brush it off after I'm finished scrubbing it on. So we're just going to work around these white areas, the center of the face and around the bottom of the stomach, just to brighten those up and soften that gray float. I'm working pretty hard on my palette when I'm swirling it around. You really want to work that paint into the brush. And I never put my these dry brushes in water. If you put water in them, you won't be able to dry brush. It'll just seep out into your paint and make a sloppy mess. So if I do need to clean them in between, I use alcohol gel, like hand sanitizer, and then that'll evaporate real quickly and let you use them again, without waiting very long. So now we're going to go back and reinforce some of our gray shading. Again, I told you I would be doing this in 2 or 3 layers, so I'm using a little black, and I'm actually start working in that patch where I was loading my dry brush, so there's enough white on there that it blended to a little darker gray. So we want just a shade darker this time, just to deepen those shadows around the face a little bit. So you can see as we add each layer, it gets a little smoother looking. So we're going to work here around the bottom of the heart. And I'm walking that out on these edges, this little triangle area, so it just softens that float a little more and doesn't look so linear. So pull up into that corner, but then walk it down in that triangular area. Okay, we're going to add a little bit of detail before we end this video. We're going to put some polka dots on it, and you can either paint these in, just trace them and paint them, or I've got a stencil that has some maybe 3/8 inch circles that I'm just using to make my dots. It's a little quicker than trying to paint them in with a brush freehand. So I'm just do one on one wing, and then while that one's drying, I'll step over and do one on the other and just alternate back and forth so I don't get them smeared. And again, I'm using my Royal Sable Brown brush as a stencil brush. And I just kind of mostly tap this paint in so I don't work it under the edges of the stencil. And so just finish in. We've got 3 dots on each leaf. I'm sorry, 3 dots on each wing. So there we've got our finished dots. And we're going to go back and do one more layer of dry brushing. again, work that paint into your brush and brush the excess off on a paper towel or a piece of brown paper. And we're going back right over these same areas again. We're just going to dry brush that white paint into the face to bring it out a little bit more and soften again into that gray side loading. And we're going to work along the bottom of the stomach. Now there's not a whole lot of room on the stomach to work in a real circular motion, so you can do circles or just brush back and forth. But again, you can see how this softens the shading and the highlighting together. And then we're going to do one more layer of floats. Again, before we start adding all our details, we want to get all these floated shading down and get all our reds nice and vibrant. And it's easier to do this heart before we put the hands in, so that we can just do nice long continuous floats down the sides rather than trying to work around little black hands and fingers. So just soften that and pull it in a little towards the center. We still see that pink glow through to give us some highlights. And now we're going to go back with some of our gray, which is our brush mix of black and white. And I could see a little edge here along this heart where it's almost like a little ridge of paint made a little white edge line around it. So I'm going back in now and covering that, just pulling up over that so that we don't see that little white line through there. I found it a little distracting. You can touch up around the head also. And this also from our dry brushing, if we got any dry brushing a little too heavy over our shadows, this again softens it down and brings our shadows back. Now I'm going to side load a little bit of white down here along the bottom of the tummy, so that'll clean up that bottom edge a little bit and just brighten that highlight also. Soften it back into the dry brushing. So at this point we're finished with video 1. We've got all our base coats down and our background in, and when you move on to video 2, we're going to do the fun little details, the face and dots and things. So I'll see you at video 2.